Now we're going to put the control system in the model. Before I show you the electronics that I'm going to use, here's all the control system parts that come in the kit. It's all the control rods, some special bell cranks for the or servo wheels for the servos, and pretty much everything you need to mount the servos, from the screws to the servo nuts to some graphite retainers to go over the servos themselves. So we're going to get started with putting this together. These are the electronics that are going to be loaded in the model. What I'm going to show you is a high voltage setup. Even though some of the servos I've got here don't support high voltages, they'll have to be regulated. But I'm going to use a Genzace 3200 milliamp lithium ferrite battery, or LIFE. It's a 6.6 volt battery. Most servos will tolerate 6 volts, so you can not have to regulate them and take that extra weight. I'm going to use a Fromco connector here that lets you connect the high voltage or high amperage connector on most of these large battery packs, and gives you 2 small Dean's connectors that you can plug into a normal radio system. I'm going to use the GY750 flybarless controller along with a Futaba S-Bus receiver and a stator gator, which will actually plug into the EI system on the HWC motor. So the servos are mounted using these little triangular shaped plastic servo nuts. You thread a self-tapping screw into them, attach them to the frame, and then the servo screws will go through these to retain it. Now they go in the servo positions, like the aileron and pitch servo position, as well as the throttle, elevator, and tail rotor. I've already put the one on the tail rotor so you can see how these look. The way this servo mounts, it's actually protruding out the side of the frame, so the bolts are going to go in from the other side. We're going to do that for all 5 servos. Alright, here I've got all the servos installed and the wiring is just roughed in. There's a throttle servo, a pitch servo, a elevator servo. I've put the flybarless gyro on the back plate. Other side of the model, we've got the tail rotor servo in the back and the aileron servo in the front. Before we put the special servo arms on these, we're going to need to have the servos as close to center as we can get them. So I'm going to need to wire up the bulk of the electronics, get it powered up, and do a basic setup before that happens. Okay, I've got everything wired up here. The servos are in place. Everything's connected. We're ready to power it up and get the servos in their center position based on the channels being in their center position, so we can put the servo arms on. You can see the right orientation for the aileron servo, and when we turn it around, you can see the proper orientation for the pitch, elevator, and throttle servo. The rotor servo installs with the control arm towards the rear of the model. Next, we're going to put the push rods together for installation. Okay, now we need to make up the push rods for the various control systems. You're going to need 2 of them for the elevator push-pull, 4 of them for the aileron and pitch push-pull, 1 for the throttle, and 2 push rods for the aileron and pitch bell cranks up to the swash plate. The links for all of these are listed on the bill thread. You can get them from there. These are the special servo arms for the aileron, pitch, and elevator controls. These have some bosses on one side and they're flat on one side. You're going to want to thread the balls into the flat side because they're actually going to mount on the servo wheel, and it needs to be a small wheel. They're going to mount like so. Going to mount like so, using these very small screws that are provided. Those will just thread into the servo wheel with some slow CA. You want to snap the ball links on for the aileron and pitch bell cranks. They run from these two bell cranks on the side up to the swash plate. That'll help you make the servo arms parallel to these when the swash plate is level and in the proper position. So you can snap on the links now for the elevator, pitch, and aileron bell cranks, as well as the servo piece which we've made up. We'll have to do the tail rotor in a second. The correct position for the rotor head for setup is that the swash arms are basically level with the bolts that clamp to the head to the main shaft. They're basically flat or parallel to the swash plate. That's where you want to set the bell cranks parallel to the servo arms. Sort of an unexpected problem for me was when I went to set up the tail rotor push rod, I found that you can't get to the servo. Once the elevator servo goes in, there's really no way to get to the servo arm on the tail rotor unless you've got a small angled screwdriver. So you may need to take out the elevator servo to get that set up. It's fairly simple to do because of this mounting system, and everything's already set up at that point, so it's fairly quick. But you very well may have to take that servo out to set up the rudder. Alright, with all the linkages on, the servo arms are parallel to the bell cranks for the aileron, pitch, and elevator. The throttle should be set up so that when the servo is centered, the throttle arm is centered, and you can make adjustments from there. And on the tail rotor, this coupling needs to be adjusted so that when the servo is centered, the tail pitch mechanism is centered on the tail. The only thing we've got left to do now is to take care of securing the tail boom push rod supports, and then we're going to put the main blades on the model and it'll be done. Okay, so now we can affix the tail control rod supports. They're held in place with tie wraps. You want to position them, the first one 10.5 inches from the back of the tail rotor transmission. Just measure back 10.5 inches. This doesn't have to be exact, to about the center of this one, and then another 10.5 inches back is where you want to put the second one. And these go on by pushing the tie wrap through a small gap just at the base of the tail boom, and at that point it's just a tie wrap. You connect it, pull it tight, it doesn't do a great job of holding this in position, but it probably shouldn't move around a lot. Now what you may want to do is put some thin CA on this. That's pretty common with these boom supports or with these push rod supports in other models. Last thing you want to do, these supports are able to move up and down like this. Well, that's all well and good, but as the model vibrates and wears, these will start to flop around while the model's moving and become quite annoying. So what I recommend you do is work the push rod with your servo so that it's nice and centered, and then take some thin CA and glue this inner piece into place. You need to be really careful so you don't get any CA on the push rod itself, or you will hook the whole thing up. But you want to stop this from moving up and down and fix it into position. once it's in the right spot, it doesn't need to move anymore anyway. All right, only thing left to do is put the main blades on. We'll do that next.